When Community first began, Britta was a voice of reason in the study group. But somehow she devolved into this butt-of-the-joke broken Barbie and was completely unrecognizable by the end of the show. We could attribute this change to the writers just not knowing what to do with her, but I'd rather look for a more in-depth explanation. Let's try and figure out what broke Britta. Hi everybody, welcome to Mind and More, where we talk about anything that comes to mind and more. Today, we're going through Community's Britta Perry's character journey in order to figure out what brought about her decline. When the show first started, I liked Britta. I still do. She's the one person who could see through Jeff's bullcrap. But somehow, the same girl who had once stood for something enough to reject Jeff's low-quality advances stepped into a bizarre, years-long situationship with that same guy. I know that after season 1, the writers were not sure where to take her character, but I also want to look closely at the things that happened in her life that could have led her to becoming this way. Her character isn't taken seriously, but to me, Britta was more than just a punchline. She actually went through a very relatable journey. Let's go through it. When we first meet Britta, it's her first week at Greendale Community College. She is described as a 20-something dropout. More specifically, she's 28 and about a decade ago she dropped out of high school to impress Radiohead, as in the band, during some kind of rebellious phase. She is now at Greendale to pursue the education she'd abruptly cut off years earlier. She doesn't have a major as yet. Jeff tries to hit on her several times, but she's not interested. Jeff is still very conceited and manipulative at this point. He goes as far as to pretend he's a certified Spanish teacher, rather tutor, who can help her even though he barely speaks any Spanish. Jeff just wants to sleep with her and pretends to be genuinely interested, but Britta can see right through the act. While the rest of the group falls for his charm, Britta continues to show Jeff that she won't be fooled. We also see that she's someone who cares about various causes, and although she may not be very knowledgeable on all of them, she does come across as having some depth. So much so that when she mentions that Guatemalan journalists are being killed to block free speech, Annie and Shirley decide to hold a silent protest. As the audience, we can see that she didn't really have the details of the situation, but she still had enough of the group's respect that they took her seriously. So let's summarize this. She's in her late 20s, she's not entirely sure what she wants to do yet, but she's just enrolled at Greendale and she's figuring it out. She's also pretty smart and she seems to care about certain global issues. As the show progresses, some kind of sexual tension develops between her and Jeff. They are constantly bickering and eventually they sleep together during the end of the world-esque paintball competition towards the end of season 1. I don't blame Jeff at all for her decline, but it is after this moment that she starts to noticeably change for the worst. In the last episode of the season, although she'd previously acted as if she wasn't interested in Jeff, she enters into a strange fight for Jeff with his ex Michelle. She gets so competitive that the fight ends in her humiliating herself by professing her love for Jeff in front of the whole school and him not reciprocating. As season 2 opens up, we find out that no one has heard from her all summer. This is unusual because they've been friends for about a year now. The rest of the group assumes she may be too embarrassed and wouldn't come back after what happened with Jeff in the last semester, but she does return. Funny enough, when she comes back, she becomes popular as the other students think her profession of love was bold. On the other hand, Jeff is seen as a jerk and he becomes the unpopular one. This leads to a competition between her and Jeff for the public's affection that results in them having a brief fake relationship where they each try to top the other's romantic gestures. Besides being obviously immature, this reveals an insecurity in her. She wanted to hold on to her newfound popularity because she was enjoying the external validation. It's something she'd never had. Remember the season 1 episode where Shirley invites Britta to accompany her to the ladies' room as a sign of friendship, but ends up being put off by Britta's inability to emotionally connect? Britta had eventually revealed to Shirley that all her life she'd always gone to the bathroom alone because other girls had never liked her. So pretending not to care was her defense mechanism. This is important because it shows Britta had previously struggled to build meaningful connections and never received the validation that comes with that. Moving on, in season 2 she takes an important step. She chooses to major in psychology. We'll come back to this in a bit. In episode 3, her and Annie are doing some fundraising, but they end up having a fight because Britta accuses Annie of feigning innocence while actually using her feminine wiles to raise funds, an act that she sees as selling out other women. What I want to point out about this is that from this you can tell that she holds certain strong beliefs. Whether she went about it the right way or whether or not she's being pretentious is irrelevant. My point is, she still seems clear on the kinds of issues she stands behind or she wants to be seen as standing behind. Another thing I want to bring out is that after the fight, her and Annie apologize to one another, and during this apology, she tells Annie that she only slept with Jeff because she hates herself. This is a big one. Here we see her insecurity peek through again. She has some unresolved self-esteem issues. Although I think she did have some genuine interest, these unresolved issues may have been what led her to choose psychology. It may have been a need to be seen as more credible when she speaks on the causes she claims to care for. Or it may have been a need to use this psychology knowledge to make sense of her own internal problems. Another thing that happens in this season is Troy starts to develop feelings for Britta, and she starts to reciprocate these feelings after he made up this story about being touched inappropriately as a child during drama class. She sympathizes with him, and that somehow leads to romantic feelings. Abed points out that the reason for this is that Britta is attracted to men in pain because it allows her to pretend to be mentally healthy. And one thing I know about Abed's observations is that they are never wrong.
You're the stupidest!
If loving worms is stupid, I don't want to be smart.
It is! And you can't be!
In the following season, season 3, Britta's decline becomes very apparent. She truly becomes a joke. In season 2, we saw the group start to become exhausted by her frequently expressing her stances on various issues. She was starting to come across as a buzzkill. But in season 3, the group's fatigue turns into full-on dismissal of anything Britta has to say. They casually call her the worst. At this point, she's been at Greendale for 2 years and her incompetence has become very visible. She's wrong a lot more often. She's overusing and misusing psychology terms, and she's opposing any and all takes for opposing's sake. A few significant things happen in her love life in this season. The first one is she meets Subway, and the reason he's named Subway is he's a personified version of the sandwich company Subway. The absurdity of it all aside, her falling in love with Subway is telling. Subway ticks all the boxes she has. He's down to earth, generous, and cares about the things she does, like animal welfare. But he's also not a regular person. He's not allowed to date or engage in many other typical human behaviors. So their love was forbidden, and they couldn't have a proper relationship while Subway still had his job or identity or whatever was going on. Basically, he's a great guy, but an unavailable guy. If you're enjoying this video and want to see more stuff like this, why not just subscribe? We see Britta's affinity to unavailable men again when her ex-boyfriend Blade comes in town with the circus. This statement is not a metaphor for anything. He literally works with the circus. But that's not what makes him unavailable. He had an injury that impacted his brain's ability to feel shame, so he's emotionally unavailable. He's extremely nonchalant, and Britta's attracted to that. She knows she's not supposed to be looking for him when he comes into town, but after kind of trying not to, she does. It's implied that Blade has always shown her this indifference, and she's drawn to that.
Britta likes guys who are mean to her. She doesn't like herself.
On the other hand, Troy is starting to develop feelings for Britta. It's a long story as to how they got to this point, but at the end of this Blade Circus episode, Troy sends a lovely message to Britta pretending to be Blade, and she's immediately put off. This is so strange because she liked him better when she thought he didn't care about her. It seems like her self-esteem issues gave her a preference for unavailable romantic partners. We'll go into what may have brought about these issues soon. Before the season closes, she finally gets into a relationship with Troy. It's unfortunate the writers didn't spend enough time developing this relationship because I think there was some real potential here. For a change, Britta was dating an emotionally available guy who seemed to genuinely care about her because they'd had friendship as a foundation. The potential was there, but the execution was poor. Anyway, in season 4, Troy and Britta break up just as quickly as they got together. However, the relationship doesn't end before the worst professor ever, Professor Cornwallis, manages to give us a line I will never forget.
Notice that the damaged blonde is dating the childish black one.
This man needed a beating. Regardless, Britta is still a joke to everybody around her, and it's now her 4th year at Greendale, and she still has a few more years to complete her degree. Jeff is set to graduate early, Shirley has her sandwich business, and Annie is on course to completion, while she's sort of at a standstill. The icing on the bad life cake is that Troy leaves to sail around the world in season 5, but their goodbye is rushed, as if they didn't even mean much to each other. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. She's now about 33. Academically, she's not doing great. Nothing is happening in the love life. Financially, there's some problems. Nothing is certain, and I can feel her when it comes to this one. There's phases in life, sometimes very long ones, when things are just so up in the air. She seems as unsure of where to take her life as she did at the start of the show. A few episodes later, in episode 7, she has one of the lowest points in the show after meeting some people from her anarchist days at a fundraiser. Britta initially thinks that they're going to think she sold out because she's now getting an education, and I guess during their anarchist days they rejected any kind of institution. But she's surprised to find out that they've sold out more than she has. She finds out everyone has moved on from their anarchist days and that some of them actually own the building the fundraiser is being held in. She has a moment where she tries to relive the glory days by urging these people to go and protest again, but one of them says that that's convenient for the one with nothing to lose.
Oh, well, that's convenient for the one with nothing to lose.
Honestly, these people are so condescending and insufferable. But anyway, this obviously hurts Britta. She thought these people were her friends and that they had shared values, but she finds that they have nothing in common anymore and they look down on her. She's so sad that she decides to leave with Duncan. Duncan of all people, who she'd been rejecting for years, by the way. While in the car, she confides in him and gives us more of a glimpse into her insecurities. She says, "I've been defining myself with reactions to and from other people my whole life, and now I feel worthless, just because I'm worthless in relation to my friends." She outright states her strong need for external validation, and she tells us she's struggling with self-worth. I relate to this quarter-life crisis feeling where something can happen and it makes you realize you had placed your sense of identity in the wrong things, or worse yet, you'd outsourced it to other people. It sucks because you have to start building your identity again, for real this time. But it's a necessary realization if you're ever going to start being true to yourself. Nevertheless, back to Britta. I applaud her for having the self-awareness to realize she'd been outsourcing her sense of self. In a rare, wise moment from Duncan, he responds saying, "You are someone even when you're by yourself."
The best lesson you could take away from it is that you are someone, even when you're by yourself.
I love this because external validation is nice and necessary to some extent, but a true sense of self comes from looking within. Even if you had no one else, you'd still be someone. Britta then admits that she was just about to do something really stupid with Duncan, her words, not mine. Similar to what we've seen from her in the past, this shows that sometimes she runs to men who are either unavailable or not well suited to her when she's having a hard time confronting her own feelings. That was the reason for her back and forth with Jeff. Season 5 ends with a scare that Greendale is closing down. There's a moment between Britta and Jeff where Britta says that she's been thinking of transferring to City College, but it's more likely she's going to go into bartending instead. It's another moment of uncertainty, and in the emotional turbulence of it all, Jeff and Britta decide to get married. 3 seasons before, they had both expressed that they hated the idea of marriage, but in the moment where they desperately need something familiar to hold on to, they decide they'll just become Mr. and Mrs. Needless to say, this idea didn't last long. Once Greendale was saved, they abandoned it. But it does prove what I mentioned about how Britta has a hard time confronting her feelings, and she'll often turn to men, mostly Jeff, to avoid dealing with the actual issue at hand. Season 6 kicks off with Britta being homeless. I guess her financial troubles had finally gotten out of hand. She's making and selling sandwiches at Shirley's, but she's really bad at it. She does, however, end up getting a bartending job in episode 2 and moves in with Abed and Annie. When she moves in, she discovers that her parents, whom she hadn't seen or spoken to in years, are actually subsidizing her rent without her knowledge. In fact, they've been paying back all her loans she takes from her friends without her knowing. Britta had an estranged relationship with her parents, and we didn't know why, but we do find out in this season. She finally pays her parents a visit and confronts them. This visit is telling. Her parents seem like very lovely people, but they seem not to understand Britta, and it seems like they don't try or have given up on trying. They just think it's enough if they sponsor her life from afar. Britta tells them that they seem nice now, but they were very stifling in the past. We find out that they once went as far as having her drug tested as an 11-year-old because they thought she was laughing too much. They then respond with an apology, but also say that they don't remember all of that. This situation doesn't read as if they were abusive. It does, however, seem like there was a bit of neglect, in that they never truly saw Britta for who she truly was, and they never paid attention to her interests or personality. They could have also trivialized the things she cared about, and that's what impacted her self-image from an early age. But by the end of the episode, Britta patches up things with her parents after Frankie reminds her that our parents are people too, and they make mistakes. A few episodes later, when Subway makes a comeback as Rick, this guy, she even goes back home with him to meet her parents. Now, speaking of Subway/Rick, when he comes back, he's now a Honda guerrilla marketer, and he still can't have a proper relationship with Britta. She initially refuses to get back with him, but gives in. She does eventually have to break it off because Rick tried to guerrilla market Hondas to her parents. She realizes she'd been gullible to take him back and that they can never have anything real, and she's sad about that. But something exciting does happen in this episode. Rick's Honda boss visits her at her bartending job and discovers that she's actually good at sales. I loved this. All along, she'd been pretty bad at everything she tried her hand at. She picks up Honda sales for a bit, but she has to quit because she finds that guerrilla sales goes against her ethics. However, I like to think that post-season 6, she became a very successful salesperson, selling in a way that she finds ethical enough and having the flexibility and autonomy that a sales job provides. Because after all, I think she was struggling to find her niche because she hadn't yet found something that allowed her freedom without compromising her values. By the end of the show, she hasn't completed her degree yet, but she's still at her bartending job. She's not in a relationship, but it seems as though the Jeff shenanigans have stopped for good now. She seems relatively grounded. Things are not perfect, but it's a far cry from her most tumultuous times. Now that we've gotten a background of Britta's life over the course of the show, let's wrap up things by going into what could have caused her insecurity or self-esteem issues, and more specific reasons for why I think she devolved over the course of the show. Number 1, lack of identity. Britta's parents being kind of dismissive of who she was left her with a shaky sense of self. It also resulted in her rebellion. She rebelled against her parents and any other kinds of authority, which is why she believed in anarchy. Being an anarchist was her way to reject authority, because authority figures hurt her during her childhood. But it was also her way of trying to find an identity. Being an anarchist became her identity. Number 2, losing the lifestyle she knew. When the show starts, Britta had left her anarchist days behind and she's turning a new leaf. But just like with losing anything, there's a sense of grief. So when she started her journey at Greendale, she was grieving, but she was putting on a face of nonchalance. As time goes by, she makes friends that she can be vulnerable with, and we start to see the cracks in her armor. All of the incompetence we started to see in her was just her being real. Number 3, infantilization by group dynamics.
When we were all just individual people, I wasn't the worst. I'm only the worst with you guys.
As the group started to see that she had weaknesses, like often needing to stand against something without knowing what she stands for, the group started to dismiss Britta, sort of like her parents did. They infantilized her, and we know that that's something she hated because at one point in season 6, she screamed at her parents to stop infantilizing her before going off on a kid's green machine.
Just pick you up.
I don't want your help! Stop infantilizing me!
Being treated like a joke made her act like one. This infantilization reinforced her self-image issues and brought about her aggressive tendencies. She couldn't trust herself to handle business, and as such, she became stuck in the same cycles. Number 4, romantic instability. One of these cycles was romantic instability. Deep down, she knew she had to address her self-esteem issues, but because she couldn't trust herself to be able to do so, she ended up just using men as an avoidance strategy. In weak moments, she would go back to Jeff, Blade, and even Subway. Finally, number 5, feeling behind. When she starts at Greendale, she's 28, which is past the age that most people start college. Though I believe we all have our own timelines, in society's eyes, she was behind. Britta being behind was reinforced by struggling to complete her degree, with Annie and Jeff finishing before she does. And then, her meeting her old anarchist friends who now have more established careers and are now richer than she is. Sometimes it's hard not to compare yourself to others, but it's especially hard for someone who depends so heavily on others to define her, like Britta did. So there we have it. That is Britta's journey on the show. And also those are some of the reasons why I think she had self-esteem problems that made her devolve over the course of the show. Britta developed some issues as a child because of not feeling seen that were never addressed until well into adulthood. As the realities of adulthood started to set in, these issues became more visible. And that's what we saw. We saw a young woman trying to figure out her life, but because it was a sitcom, it was exaggerated and played for laughs. Even though this kind of identity crisis is something you can experience in real life. But although we saw Britta broken for a while, we also saw her make strides. We saw her moments of being honest with herself. We saw her forgive and patch up things with her parents. We saw her eventually reject meaningless romantic relationships like the one she had with Jeff or Subway. By the end, it seemed like she'd kind of accepted where she was in life, working her bartending job with a fair amount of enthusiasm. For someone who'd never been interested in a conventional life, I think she might have got what she wanted. Convention says one must have it all figured out by their mid-30s, having a solid career, maybe a house, marriage, and some kids. But Britta didn't settle for all of that. She probably never noticed, but she was living the unconventional life she'd always craved. Sticking it to society by being 34, unmarried, with no kids, no romantic relationship, no degree or concrete career yet, bartending, and just taking every day as it comes.